Hello everyone and welcome to another Leagues 4 video. Today we'll be going over the absolute best regions for every single combat style, featuring the new combat relics that have only recently been announced for Leagues 4. Now I've made a guide before talking about what regions to select based on content you enjoy and content you dislike. This video will be focusing more on the optimal regions for the combat style, and even if you're not going for the best regions, give you a breakdown of what regions give you gear for the respective combat regions and some alternatives that you can go if you're not comfortable with a certain region or you want to avoid certain content. Remember that you'll have Mistlin and Karumja from the start. Everybody has access to those, and of the 8 remaining elective regions, you'll be able to pick 3 of them. Much of the information in this video does come from the Leagues Discord, as well as the famous DPS calculator for old school RuneScape, which has been updated now with the new Leagues 4 relics. This will be linked in the description, so you can use it as well to test for yourself and basically compare different setups or different regions that you might be thinking of going. I don't shout out the Leagues Discord nearly enough. They have a lot of great information there, and a lot of the regional deep dive videos are cross-checked using the Discord. More than any other video though, I really owe it to them because they have done incredible research into the optimal builds going into the leagues. Check it out guys, it's a great community. I've been a part of it for like 4 years now. A lot of fun there. So before we talk about regions, we do need to understand the combat relics a bit. RuneScape runs on a tick system. 1 tick is equal to 0.6 seconds, and this basically means that there are 100 ticks per minute. Essentially, RuneScape is a rhythm game set to 100 beats per minute. Now, on top of a couple passive effects, which we'll get into with each respective relic, the general idea is that attack speed of weapons will be halved, and this is rounded down for 4-tick and 5-tick weapons. This means that 4-tick and 5-tick weapons will become 2-tick. Half of 5 is 2.5, rounded down, that's 2. And for weapons 3 ticks or less, their attack speed gets halved, but that gets rounded up. So a 2-tick weapon becomes a 1-tick weapon. This is basically to avoid a 3-tick weapon getting rounded down to 1 tick. 5-tick weapons includes things such as the Shadow. 2-tick weapons include things such as the Blowpipe. And you can see that with this buff, 5-tick weapons will be attacking at 250%, 2.5 times the speed, whereas 4-tick and 2-tick weapons will just be operating at 200%, which is 2 times the speed. Essentially, 5-tick weapons will be as fast as Blowpipe in the main game. This means that the name of the game for Leagues 4 is going to be to abuse the heck out of 5-tick relics. They have the most to benefit from the attack speed bonuses coming from the combat style relics. In addition, whatever combat style you choose to go with, you're going to want to abuse that as much as possible and try to do as much of the content as you can with it. Even if a monster is strong to your preferred style, you'll often have enough accuracy to kind of just get past that, and you'll be doing so much more damage with your dominant combat style that you should always be trying to use that for all PVM content. So just to feature some of the most important 5-tick weapons in the game, for magic we have Tumikin's Shadow. For melee you'll have the Fang as well as the Scythe. Now you may be a bit pessimistic about the Scythe, but they have recently announced that the Scythe will preserve 90% of its charges, so it's not going to chew through blood runes at ungodly speeds. There's still going to be some costs obviously, but it is actually usable now without burning through your entire cash stack. For range we have the Twisted Bow as well as the Zerite Crossbow. Now you may notice that technically the Twisted Bow and the Zerite Crossbow are 6-tick weapons. Range weapons are unique in that they have the rapid attack style, which speeds up their attack by 1 tick. This turns them into 5-tick weapons, and then it gets halved and rounded down to 2-tick. So just make sure you're using these ranged weapons on rapid. When looking at optimal regions, I have 3 criteria in mind in descending order of importance. So number 1 is the most important, and that's of course going to be your on-style gear. When I say on-style, that refers to your chosen combat relic that's going to benefit from the increased attack speed. And then off-style would of course be the 2 other combat styles that you're not going for. We really want to squeeze the most DPS out of our on-style, so getting the weapons and armor that's going to buff your DPS is super crucial. Next, it's good to consider on-style bosses. You want to make sure that the regions you pick have as many bosses that are susceptible to your chosen style. For example, Zulrah cannot be attacked with melee, so if you're going to go to Tyrannwyn with melee, well, you can't attack with a melee weapon there. This would mean you would have to do the boss off-style, and you're losing some of the benefit of your selected relic. This isn't a deal breaker necessarily, but it can be more frustrating if you have a lot of bosses that you have to do off-style. And third, it's good to look at what kind of off-style gear is available in your region choices. This is especially important if you're doing something like raids where you're probably going to need to bring 3 styles anyways. Just having some kind of setup there is nice to have because you're not going to be able to slam your one style in every single situation if that boss is immune. So with that criteria in mind, the absolute best region for Leagues 4 is whatever the heck you want to play. Okay, there is one more criteria. Those criteria is 0, and that's the fun factor that I mentioned before. I know that's not the answer you wanted to hear. I will be getting to that very soon. But seriously, you're going to be doing some insane damage regardless of what you go. So I would definitely say just pick regions that you like to do. You don't need to kill yourself and pick the optimal best thing and then burn out in 3 weeks and be like, wow, this sucks. And also, we're not considering things such as skilling options or what kind of tasks are available. So like if you don't want to do a certain task in an area, just, it's up to you. You can choose what you want to do. And just for fun, I wanted to play a game in the comment section. Now, pick a combat style, and I want you to choose 3 regions to create the absolute worst choice you could possibly make. Post that in the comments below, and if you see somebody else, try to see if you can figure out what makes their build better than they might think. I'll leave my answer, so don't spoil it just by looking at mine. And on second thought, I realize it's at least a bit better than I assumed, so let me know what you think the worst region can be. Now, for the rest of the video, I'm not going to bring up subjective fun experience because I obviously have no way to rate that. So this is something that you should be doing as you watch the video, but I'm not going to bring up like, oh, this boss sucks, so don't do this. It's pretty much going to be like by the books, what bosses, what gear. We're not going to talk about what's boring and what's fun. Okay, and starting with melee, I think it's really important to establish a baseline of what you'll even have available before you have to go and make your pick of other areas. Over in Mistlin, this weapon has been overshadowed by the Dragon Scimitar since Monkey Madness came out. And finally, the 5-tick Dragon Longsword is making its resurgence as one of the best, most dominant early game weapons that you can get this leaks. Not only is it stronger than its brother, the Dragon Scimitar, it's also going to be stronger than an Abyssal Whip. Just this alone is going to carry you until you start getting the really high-end stuff. So if you want to experience that 2004 nostalgia, melee is the way to go. Over in Karamja, you'll of course have the Fire Cape and the Infernal Cape from the Fight Cave and the Inferno. I wanted to point this out because melee Inferno is probably going to be the hardest of the 3 combat styles. So if you've never done the Inferno before, this might be a lot harder than if you were going maged or ranged. Karamja also gives us the Obsidian armor and Obsidian weaponry. In particular, the Obsidian mace is a 5-tick weapon. Combined with the Obsidian armor set, as well as a Berserker necklace, you get a substantial strength bonus to Obsidian weapons. So by using an Obsidian mace, you're going to be doing unbelievable damage. This is basically best in slot until you get to the raids weapons, although it's kind of a grind to actually get all the Obsidian or get enough Tokal to just buy it yourself. And moving into the best regions, this is the old reliable Kandarin, Asgarnia, Mauritania. It's coming back from the last Trailblazer, and it's still pretty damn good. Just looking at what every region offers, Kandarin will give you Piety, Torture, and a Fighter Torso, which can be an early game armor piece. Asgarnia gives you full Bandos, which then upgrades into full Torva once you start doing next. You'll get your Defenders, God Swords, which gives you a spec weapon if you need it, and Dragon Boots, which upgrade into Primordial Boots through Cerberus. Finally, Mauritania offers even more melee weapons through the Theater of Blood. You'll of course have access to a Scythe, which is a 5-tick weapon, and against larger enemies, I mean, this thing is just going to rip it apart. You also get the Avernic Hilt, which upgrades to the Avernic Defender because you have Asgarnia. Now, the Garazi Rapier is only a 4-tick weapon, so it's not getting that full benefit, but it's still probably going to be better than like a Dragon Longsword if that's the best you had. And with Mauritania, you'll get the Amulet of Blood Fury, which can really help you with sustaining your health. The melee gets a bonus effect of plus 50% defense, so with the increased defense as well as some lifesteal, the extra damage you're going to be doing, you're kind of going to be very tanky as melee. It's going to be pretty difficult to die. This is a super fun build that's been getting a lot of traction now that Scythe will save charges. There's a reason it was so popular last time, so definitely consider this when you're going for your melee build. Now, if you're not keen on Theater of Blood, there's another very competitive option, and that's to replace Mauritania with the Desert. This is what I call KDA, Kandarin Desert Asgarnia, and it's also going to be a great region selection for you. By far, the greatest part of this build is the fact that you're going to be getting a Fang very early. Fang is a really common drop from Tombs of Amascut, and it's also a lot easier to go ahead and start Tombs of Amascut compared to Theater of Blood, where doing solos is quite difficult, so you're probably going to need to at least find duos, if not a group, to do Theater of Blood with. And with just like a Fang and Defender and a Fighter Torso or something, you're going to be doing so much damage that I don't even know if you're going to feel bad about not having a Scythe. And you've unlocked so much of your potential so much faster than the Mauritania build has, which might honestly help you get the rest of your gear faster, do more tasks, whereas all the Mauritania crew are still, farming Theater of Blood, trying to get their Scythe before their power really comes online. In addition, in the desert, you'll get the Lightbearer, which will increase your spec recharge. Special attack weapons always end up being incredibly powerful in leagues. However, they haven't announced any special attack relic yet, so I can't really speculate on that. Just keep in mind, special attack weapons are good. They will be very good. And finally, the Desert also gives you another 5-tick weapon, the Soul Reaper Axe. This does beat the Fang on certain combat, depending on the defense level of the enemies that you're fighting. However, with this region selection, the only way for you to obtain the Soul Reaper Axe would be to either do the Leviathan, who is immune to melee, or you can do the Whisperer, which you can fight with melee, but she has an incredibly strong, a very accurate melee attack, so I don't really know if that's going to be a reasonable way of killing her. You may have to do these bosses off-style, which would be a pretty steep grind before you actually can use the Soul Reaper Axe at all. But in general, the consistency of the Fang and the ease in acquiring it makes this the bread and butter melee build for me. Luckily, melee is pretty flexible, and of these 4 regions, you can kind of make your own mix and match of really whatever you want. The 2 regions on the left, Kandarin and Asgarnia, are the support regions for melee. The power level that you get from Piety is about the same as the gear you get from Asgarnia. So really these zones are pretty equal in terms of what they offer you as a support. And the Desert and Mauritania become your weapon regions, where you're going to get your main hand weapon that's going to obviously do the most amount of damage and you're sort of building around. So if you just pick 3 out of 4 of these, you really can't go wrong because you're going to be getting at least 1 weapon region and 1 support region. You could do like Desert and Mauritania, where you get your Fang early and then go slam Theater of Blood and use the Scythe, and you have like Piety helping you out and stuff. So really melee is just super flexible, and I would just pick whatever you like from these regions. Now, if you don't like Mauritania, maybe you're not a big fan of Theater of Blood, Fremennik is also a competitive option that can kind of fill that spot. The Fremennik region offers the Nate Does Not face guard, which is your best helmet until you have Torva. You're also going to get the Berserker ring, and if you have the Desert with that, you'll be able to access Duke Succulus. Really, this is why Fremennik is such a good melee region for me, is that if you're going to go for the Desert and you want to play around with the Soul Reaper Axe and make a Soul Reaper Axe build, fighting the Duke to get your Soul Reaper Axe pieces is going to be so much easier with melee than going and fighting the Whisperer. And then you could just supplement that with one of the support regions, either Kandarin or Asgardia. Just remember that if you're going for the Soul Reaper Axe, you're not going to benefit from the Defender, so Kandarin might be a little stronger there. Also, the Fremennik has access to the Leaf-Bladed Battle Axe. This is also a 5-tick weapon, and it's actually better than even a Garazi Rapier. The fact that it drops from Kurasks makes it very easy to acquire. It's one of the earliest melee weapons you can get that's going to slam content and carry you all the way into later content. You can very easily skip doing any Obsidian if you just get a Leaf-Bladed Battle Axe and proceed until Tombs. And if you are very new to PVM or you just don't like doing the Desert, you can also go for Kandarin, Asgardia, and Fremennik, so you have a raidless option there. You won't have access to everything, but it's going to work great for melee. It's what I did last time. I had a lot of fun with it, and I don't regret it at all. I wanted to give an honorable mention to the Wilderness and Zaya for the Voidwaker and Dragon Claws, respectively. Unfortunately, these regions are not exactly optimal for melee, but these are special attack weapons, so depending on any relics we get that will buff your special attack, these may end up being actually viable for melee as well. Unfortunately, it seems that the Voidwaker's special attack is buffed by the Mage Relic, but the attack speed of the weapon is buffed by the melee weapon, so this makes the Voidwaker just a really awkward weapon to use. And we're not quite done yet. From the whispers of gods of old, a forbidden build has begun to emerge, one that is not for the faint of heart, because you won't be using a weapon at all. You'll be relying on faith in a higher power. And so I welcome you to your initiation into the cult of the door. So whoever said Din's Bulwark is useless, finally you can also get Din's Bulwark from the raid. I honestly don't really know what you would be using it for, but you know, it exists. Yeah, that guy's an idiot. One of the bonus effects of the melee relic is that you'll get a 50% bonus to your defensive stats. So it's like your slash defensive bonus, your crush defensive bonus, that stuff. Well, as it turns out, Din's Bulwark from Zaya gets more damage based on your defensive bonus. It's also a 5-tick weapon, meaning it gets turned into a 2-tick Juggernaut. As a result, people are speculating that this two-handed shield will become the most competitive melee damage in the entire game, even beating out the Scythe. I cannot promise you 100% that this will work, but this is why faith is required, my friends. You'll also have to get the Din's Bulwark to begin with, which is not an easy task. It is quite rare from the Chambers of Zarek. But if you acquire this beast, you can pair this with a region like Kandarin for Piety and Torture, and take this even further with Mauritania, which will give you the Justiciar pieces. This armor has the best defensive bonuses in the entire game, as well as percentage damage reduction. You could go up to like 600 defensive stats with this setup. And once we add something like the Amulet of Blood Fury, so now you're getting sustain on top of the crazy damage that you're doing, I don't know if it's possible to die. Like seriously, you will never ever die. I don't know if it's possible for you to die unless you seriously AFK, and even then you might still be able to kill everything. So yeah, all the information for this build is still subject to change, but if you want to try something really freaking wacky, that's going to be a lot of fun, one, start taking a look at the door build. You can also switch this up if you don't want to go Mauritania for a more aggressive option. This would use Ascarnia so that you can get Torva and also benefit from the God Swords in case you had any kind of special attack going on. And while this does do more damage than the Mauritania setup, you're losing a good amount of defensive options as well as the sustain from the Amulet of Blood Fury, so I'd probably go Mauritania just for that alone. Okay, moving on to magic. This gets cracked right from the start with a Staff of Fire that you can buy from Varrock. This autocasts from the standard spellbook at 5 ticks, which will get benefited over to a 2-tick caster. And honestly, with just this, you'll be carried through the early game. You're probably going to get some crazy fast magic experience. Now, the absolute core of magic builds rely on 2 regions, Kandarin and the Desert. These are both basically mandatory if you're trying to go for an optimal mage build. So if you really don't like these regions, I would probably just not go magic. The Desert, of course, gives you Tunic and Shadow, a 5-tick staff. This is going to do some of the most consistent, highest damage in the entire game. However, its passive effect triples the percentage damage and accuracy that you get from your gear. This is kind of why Kandarin becomes required for mage as well. The Occult Necklace gives you a 10% magic damage, and the Tormented Bracelet gives you a 5%. Together, that's 15%, which when tripled is 45% damage to the shadow that you would be giving up on otherwise. The Mage Relic also buffs your damage by 20%, however, that will not be tripled. That's a separate thing. Now, in addition, these 2 zones give you a wide range of magic options. The Desert with Ancient Magics is going to be great. Depending on how ice spells work with the accuracy, the Trident is also going to be a great competitive option. Unfortunately, the Trident's a 4-tick weapon, so it's not getting that full benefit, but it may have its uses, and it's a pretty easy weapon to get. Again, though, Ancient Magics are just going to be king, and that just gets taken even further once we get the Virtus Robes. Because the Desert unlocks Desert Treasure 2, you'll have access to the Leviathan, and while traditionally you'd be fighting the Leviathan with range, magic works just fine too. So you're going to be able to get your full Virtus Robe set just through the Leviathan if you so choose. And for the absolute best routes, there's 2 competitive options that are very close. Absolute max DPS is going to be adding Zaya to the mix. This will give you the Ancestral Armor from Chambers of Zarek, which is a slight upgrade over Virtus. You'll also get Augury, which increases your magic accuracy, but it does not increase your magic damage. And the Shadow is already really accurate, plus the Mage Relic that buffs your accuracy, so Augury might be a bit of an overkill. I don't think that the benefit there is really the reason why you're going for Zaya. And you will also get access to the Arceus Spellbook, which lets you summon Thralls. Now, this doesn't really count for magic itself, but it's going to be extra DPS for you that other regions won't have access to. Your other option is to go Fremenic. This gives you the Magus Ring from Duke. This build works because instead of Ancestral, you'll still have your Virtus Robes, and you're only giving up a small percentage DPS by using the Magus Ring instead of the upgrade to Ancestrals. In addition, you'll get access to the Saturated Heart from Phantom Muspa, whereas the Zaya route would only have the Imbued Heart. So you're getting the extra magic levels on top of that. Now, in most content in the game, these 2 builds will have the exact same max hit with the Shadow, so they are very comparable. In Tombs of Amascut, though, Zaya wins by just 1 max hit, so again, it's very, very close. And that's just because salts will override the bonus of Saturated Heart that you would get. But honestly, Kandarin and Desert alone are so damn strong and so pivotal to the mage setup that you can really go whatever you want. Just for some available options for you to consider. Personally, I'm heavily leaning towards Kandarin, Desert, and Ascarnia with a mage setup. First off, I really like this because you'll get access to the Whisperer. This boss gets absolutely shredded with magic, so it's going to be the easiest way for me to get Virtus Robes or a Soul Reaper Axe if I want to get that as well. There's not a lot for magic in Ascarnia. You'll only get the Eternal Boots from Cerberus, which is hardly an upgrade to begin with. But I still like this region because access to the God Wars will give you a pretty well-rounded set across the board. Getting your Defenders, Torva, a Zerite Crossbow for range damage. It's going to help a lot for the occasional moment when I can't just slam it with the Shadow. For example, during Wardens, they go immune to magic for a bit. And the last phase of Akka, of course, requires melee. So I want to have some kind of melee setup for that. The Wilderness gets an honorable mention here just for the Accursed Scepter. From what I know, this is like the only mage special attack that exists, so it's always worth keeping an eye on just in case, you do need some kind of special attack. In general, mage has very high DPS, it's very competitive, but the special attack relics may start to push melee and ranged ahead because they have more powerful options. And also, I've been kind of playing around with the idea of Tyrannwyn as a 3rd pick. This is basically just to be a support region. It doesn't really give you anything for magic, but you're going to shred Zulrah with magic, you're going to destroy the Hunlif, and Tyrannwyn is known to be a pretty easy task region. If you don't have a lot of time and you don't want to add like Zaya so you have to do all of Chambers of Zarek into the list, like this can be an option you can consider. You also get the Blowpipe, which can pair with the Masori armor, and that might be useful for destroying boulders during the Baba encounter. Okay, and if you wanted a bit of a meme mage build, one that doesn't require the Shadow, this is the Fire Surge build using Zaya, Kandarin, and Fremenic. Your main weapon will actually be the Smoke Battle Staff from Kandarin. This is a 5-tick staff That will be now 2 tick, which you'll be using to cast Fire Surge. Unfortunately, this will basically require Fremenic so that you have the ability to make Wrath runes. And to actually get to the Wrath altar, you'll need both Kandarin and Fremenic to get to the Myths Guild. Now, you could also farm Wrath runes from like Vorkath, but I would definitely not recommend that. That's going to take you hours and hours and hours. Finally, we add Zaya so that we can get the Tome of Fire from Wintertodt. This buffs the damage of fire spells from the standard spellbook, and since Fire Surge is our main damage, this is just going to help buff that up. And just to be clear, this is not going to be competitive with the Shadow build. I just want to have some option in case Desert's not available. And if you really can't stand Kandarin or the Desert, just don't go Magic, okay? Okay, moving on to range and one of the biggest shakeups in the league's meta. Because crossbows on Rapid are 5 tick, this now makes them 2 tick weapons. In addition, the range relic will double the chance for enchanted bolts to occur. So while many people wrote off the range relic as boring and uninspired, this really changes the meta in favor of crossbows for this leagues. You also have a 10% chance to fire an extra projectile, which can also proc enchanted bolts. Specifically, enchanted ruby bolts are going to be some of your highest source of DPS, not just for range, but really for the entire game. So with the starting areas, we can actually get a rune crossbow. Runite limbs are a 1 in 16 chance to drop from steel dragons, which you can find in Karamja. And in a lot of cases, a rune crossbow with enchanted ruby bolts is actually going to be stronger than a Bofa. So you're going to be getting a lot of value as early as a rune crossbow. A lot of your power level is going to come online very fast. However, even with a 90% chance to save your bolts, you're always going to need to consider how you actually make the ruby bolts to begin with. And at low health monsters, you're going to want to swap to diamond bolts because ruby bolts do damage based off their percentage current health. Okay, and the best range setup bar none, in fact, I would probably consider this the highest damage setup across the entire league, is going to be Desert, Zaya, and Asgarnia. Everything pairs together just beautifully here. Over in the desert, you're going to get the Masori armor, which can then be upgraded to the fortified Masori armor with Armadillo armor that you get from Asgarnia. You'll also get the Lightbearer, which you can use with the Zerite crossbow to throw out more special attacks. And if there is a special attack relic, I think this only takes this region selection to another level because you'll be able to spam the Zerite crossbow and then finish things off with your other DPS choices. And of course, you'll have access to the Twisted Boat from Zaya as your main DPS source. I was a bit more hesitant to make builds relying on the Twisted Bow. Now that you can go up to 5 times drop rate, a region selection like this is a bit more viable, even with 2 raids and Nex to get the Zerite crossbow. Additionally, from Chambers of Xeric, you're going to get Rigor, which is buffing your range damage across the board. This is by far the most important prayer to get, so Rigor really helps out here. You'll also get the Twisted Buckler, which is your best in slot ranged offhand to pair with your Zerite crossbow. And Asgarnia also gives you your Pegation boots from Cerberus. If that wasn't enough for you, your off-style gear just becomes incredible. You get the Fang and the Shadow, you get Ancestral from Zaya, you get full Torva from Asgarnia. Like, you really get everything here. You'll be able to kill the Leviathan to get a Soul Reaper axe if you wanted that. I mean, seriously, this region selection has it all. That being said, there is a huge drawback, and I'll break the criteria rule just this once. This is an incredibly PVM dense route. For some of you, that might be great. You want to do a lot of combat. You want to spend a lot of time in raids or fighting Nex, but it will be very time consuming. You can go dry. And I would just be a little careful if you're trying to do this and also competing for points, because the collective amount of time to actually do all of the tasks for these zones is going to be pretty substantial compared to some of the easier zones. Don't let that dissuade you though. If you got a lot of time on your hands and you want to go for like the highest damage setup, this is definitely the way. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about our Fallen King, Tyrannwyn. Previously, this was the ranged meta, and you got a huge source of your damage from getting the Bofa. But now that 5-tick weapons and crossbows are king, these two have definitely fallen a bit in favor. I will say, though, that I've looked at some calculations. The Bofa is still going to be a great weapon. And if you want to go for an easier setup that doesn't rely on the previous one, like you can just get a Bofa and you're still going to cruise through all of the content in the game. The DPS is going to be insane. You're not going to be struggling to kill stuff. And there's never going to be a reason why you can't complete content with just the Bofa and Crystal Armor. In addition, a 1-tick blowpipe is just really fun to use. So while this isn't like the optimal region, you don't completely throw this away. And that wraps up all 3 combat styles. I'm really impressed with the changes to the combat relics. I'm really impressed with the changes to the combat relics as well as some of the new updates to the zones. It's really changed the meta, and it feels like all 3 combat styles are viable for the first time. It really opens up the doors to a wide variety of builds, especially if we see some more relics coming up. And compared to the last Trailblazer, where there felt like a really obvious route to go, I think you could honestly justify pretty much anything. So play around with it, use these guides as a starting block, as a foundation for you to go your own path, and just have fun with leaks. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.